We buried them in stone. We burned their temples, shattered their idols, rewrote their names into monsters and devils. We crowned new gods, calling the old ones forgotten. But they were never gone. Their names still echo in forgotten forests. Their rites still linger in our holidays, our stories, our blood. And now, after centuries in the dark, they are stirring, not in temples, but in festivals, online rituals, and quiet prayers to the earth and sky. The old gods are rising again. This is Pantheon mythology, and this is the return of paganism. If you too want to rise again, check out Pantheon Apparel, our clothing brand inspired by myths, folklore and legends. We ship worldwide and are rated excellent on Trustpilot. Link in the description. The word pagan comes from the Latin paganus, meaning country dweller, outsider or villager. Early Christians used it as a label for those who clung to the old ways, those outside the cities where the new faith was spreading. Over time it became a weaponized term, grouping countless belief systems under a single word that implied ignorance, superstition, and defeat. But the beliefs it referred to were anything but simple. Across the world, people honored gods, ancestors, spirits, and the natural world. In Scandinavia, they called on Odin and Freya. In West Africa, they turned to the Orishas for guidance. The Slavs made offerings to the forest spirits and household guardians. The Greeks and Romans worshipped a vast pantheon of deities who governed every part of life. In pre-Islamic Arabia, tribes prayed to sky gods and desert spirits under an open sky. Paganism shaped a world-view rooted in cycles and connection. Time was seen as circular, marked by seasons and celestial rhythms. The earth was sacred, and so were the trees, rivers, and animals. Rituals honored the forces that sustained life, celebrated birth, mourned death, and sought harmony with the unseen. These beliefs were not bound by scripture, but by land, memory, and tradition. The fall of paganism began with the rise of empire-backed faith. When Emperor Constantine aligned himself with Christianity in the 4th century, the old gods lost their political shield. What followed under Theodosius was a systematic campaign. Pagan rites were banned, sacred spaces condemned, and the old ways cast into shadow. Temples that had stood for centuries were sealed and destroyed. In Alexandria, the great Serapeum was reduced to rubble. Statues of gods were dragged through the streets, altars were desecrated, libraries burned. These were not isolated acts of vandalism. They were coordinated efforts to erase a worldview from public life. But conquest through fire was only part of the strategy. Many of the festivals were preserved in name, but their meaning was rewritten. Midwinter rites honoring the rebirth of the sun became Christmas. Spring celebrations of renewal and fertility were transformed into Easter. The symbols remained evergreen trees, eggs, hares, but they served a new theology. The gods themselves were redefined. Pan, once a spirit of music and wild places, took on the features of the Christian devil. The horned god, once a symbol of balance and the cycle of life, became a figure of fear. The goddess, honored for her power to give life and heal, was branded a witch. Her name became a whisper and used in trials and executions. As the church expanded its influence, it claimed control over education, writing, and law. Oral traditions were dismissed as superstition. Local beliefs were forbidden or absorbed into saint cults. What once lived in ritual, in memory, in community, was confined to silence. Paganism wasn't defeated in battle, it was dismantled, censored, and buried beneath the weight of empire and scripture. The gods may have been cast out of the temples, but they remained in the corners of everyday life, in quiet places, far away from the reach of bishops and kings. Their echoes lived on. They survived in the rustling woods, the warmth of hearth fires, in the stories told after dark. Fairies, elves, and household spirits replaced the old gods in name, but their habits were familiar. Offerings were left at thresholds, protective charms hung above doorways. Festivals marked solstices and equinoxes, often under Christian names, but with customs rooted in something far older. People danced around maypoles, fires were still lit on midsummer nights. The rituals were never entirely forgotten. They simply changed their masks. Those who kept the traditions alive did so without altars or scriptures. They were midwives, herbalists, charmers, and cunning folk. Their knowledge passed from mother to daughter, from neighbour to neighbour. They healed with plants, whispered blessings over newborns, and read signs in smoke and storm. The church called it superstition, then dangerous. But to those who lived by the land, it was simply what had always been done. Even the saints bore traces of the old gods. Bridget of Kildare shared her name, her fire, and her healing power with a goddess once worshipped across Ireland. St. Nicholas travelled through the sky in midwinter, knew who had been good or wicked, and offered gifts in return. These figures were Christian in name, but carried the shape and spirit of those who came before. Paganism never vanished. It adapted, scattered and whispered. It lived in the cracks of official religion, hidden in customs, stories, and the turning of the year. Though the gods had been buried, their memory moved quietly through the generations, waiting. The silence didn't last forever. By the 19th century, something began to stir beneath the surface of modern Europe. As factories rose and forests fell, as hunger grew for stories older than steel, the Romantic movement began to turn its gaze to the past, to ruined temples, half-remembered gods, and the mist-wrapped myths of an earlier age. Poets, painters, and folklorists sought meaning in the legends once dismissed as superstition. The past no longer looked primitive, it looked sacred. This fascination was more than artistic. In Britain, groups began reviving druidic traditions, gathering at ancient sites like Stonehenge to honour seasonal change and ancestral memory. Gerald Gardner laid the foundations of Wicca, blending ceremonial magic, folk practice, and goddess worship into something both new and deeply rooted. Aleister Crowley drew on Egyptian and Hermetic sources to shape Thelema, a system of will and ritual that echoed ancient rites. Elsewhere, Reconstructionist movements took shape. Hellenic revivalists in Greece, heathens in Scandinavia and North America, Slavic Rodnovers in Eastern Europe, each reaching back to restore what history had scattered. By the late 20th century, paganism had stepped back into the light. In many countries, it gained legal recognition. Public rituals returned, fires were lit again on solstice nights, this time with permission. Circles gathered in woodlands, mountains, and city parks to mark the turning of the year. The gods were no longer confined to memory. They were being named again, honoured again, in ways both ancient and adapted. These revivals were rarely exact replicas of the past, but in the rituals, in the chants, in the slow movement of feet on sacred ground, something returned. A sense of presence, a call once silenced, now answered. The revival that once gathered in groves and festivals has found new ground, in screens, forums, and hashtags. The digital age has become a fertile landscape for the old gods to rise once more, not through temples or priesthoods, but through memes, live streams, and shared rituals scattered across the world. Online covens now span continents. TikTok witches blend tradition and trend in short bursts of spellwork and symbolism. On Reddit, mythology communities dissect ancient texts and reconstruct forgotten rites. Instagram grids become digital altars filled with candles, runes, and offerings laid out in bedrooms and kitchen corners. For many, this is the new sacred space, private, portable, and deeply personal. Among the rising figures are gods both ancient and reimagined. Dionysus, Hecate, and Cernunnos appear in posts, equal parts reverent and ironic. Worship shifts between humour and sincerity, but the presence remains. These are not idols restored by scholars. They are gods chosen by feeling, symbols of chaos, freedom, transformation and desire, reborn into a world they once ruled in myth. Ancient texts, once kept behind locked cases or academic paywalls, are now just a click away. Grimoires, hymns, rituals, all searchable, shareable, and remixable. The gatekeepers are gone. No priest is needed, no temple must be built. In this new era, everyone becomes their own guide, their own interpreter, their own priest. What emerges is a spiritual awakening without institutions, a movement shaped not by hierarchy, but by connection. Connection to the earth, to history, to myth, and to one another. The gods are speaking again, and this time they're finding their voice in places no one could have predicted. But why now? Why after centuries of silence are the gods being named again? Why are rituals returning, myths resurfacing, and ancient symbols woven back into daily life? In a world that feels increasingly rootless, the gods offer something ancient. As organized religion loses its hold and institutions crumble, many are left searching for something beyond doctrine or dogma. What rises in its place is something older, a return to ritual, to earth, to story. The climate crisis has deepened this search. As forests burn and oceans rise, people feel the disconnect more sharply. Modern life has stripped nature of its sacredness, turned the soil into a resource and the sky into a ceiling. But paganism speaks of a living world, where rivers are spirits and trees hold memory. In its return, there's a plea to honour what has been neglected, to see the world as alive again. This renewal is also a response to the legacy of conquest. For centuries, indigenous and ancestral beliefs were dismissed as savage or superstitious. Now, people are beginning to reclaim what was taken. The gods of their ancestors, once demonized, colonized, or erased, are being remembered with new reverence. It's not nostalgia. It's repair. And all around us, the modern world is in flux, political systems fracture, certainty vanishes, culture shifts faster than it can be understood. In the chaos, people reach for something stable, something timeless. The old gods offer roots in a world that feels unmoored. They don't promise salvation, they offer presence. They don't demand belief, they invite recognition. But even revival casts a shadow. As paganism re-emerges, it does so along fractured lines. Some seek historical accuracy, reconstructing rites, languages, and rituals from archaeology and surviving texts. Others take a more intuitive path, blending traditions, symbols, and beliefs into something personal or fluid. These differences spark tension. What counts as authentic? Who decides what's real? Beneath the surface, darker currents have begun to stir. In some corners of the revival, pagan symbols have been seized by nationalist groups. Thor's hammer, once a sacred emblem, has been used to signal exclusion. Slavic runes and ancestral rites are co-opted by those seeking ethnic purity rather than spiritual connection. These appropriations twist ancient beliefs into weapons, creating a distorted mirror of the very oppression paganism once resisted. Paganism's return is not free from complexity. The gods may be rising, but so are the questions, and the answers, like the gods themselves, refuse to be simple. The gods are no longer hidden. Across the world, paganism is no longer a whisper. It is spoken aloud in weddings held beneath oak trees, in naming rites that call upon ancestors and elemental spirits, in rituals that honor the moon, the harvest, the dead. Temples are being rebuilt, not to recreate the past, but to give it space in the present. In courts and census records, the shift is visible. In some countries, paganism is now recognized as a legal faith. Thousands identify with the old ways, and as the number grows with each generation, what was once forgotten is now protected. What was buried is now counted. This is more than revival, it is resurrection. The gods do not return unchanged, they adapt, they shift, reappear in forms suited to the world we now live in. They are honored not just through sacrifice and scripture, but through art, community ritual and resistance. They move through festivals, through code, through ink on skin and stone. We no longer need to imagine the gods walking again. We see their footprints already. The fires that burn on solstice nights, the chants rising over city skylines, in the silence that settles when offerings are laid down beneath trees older than memory. They're back. And this time, they're not waiting to be believed, only remembered. The gods we buried are rising again, not in thunder or flame, but in silence, memory and need. We thought they were gone, but they were only waiting for us to realize what we lost.